power to change character traits that we find undesirable is to simply ask ourselves when we're confronted with the decision, what would this type of person do? And then act in accordance to that. And I find it much simpler than having the lists and having the daily routines and the things like that, because if you are this type of person, you will do the types of things that that type of person would do. And that also comes down to the many decisions we haven't accounted for yet. You're going to be confronted with situations that you have not predicted. In fact, the vast majority of us don't predict things well in general. It's because there's far more variables than we can possibly comprehend. I think it's much more useful for us to think about ourselves in terms of, if I were to encompass all of the things that I would like to be, right? And that's why I think the what would Jesus do was such a powerful statement in the Christian community overall. And candidly, people outside of the Christian community could use that same exact thing, which what would Jesus do in this instance, and probably get the right activity and become more like Jesus, right? Which is the entire goal of the Christian faith. And if it makes it easier for you to think in a more tangible sense when you're asking yourself the question, I think the reason the Jesus thing was so powerful is that there's a very real identity that they're associating this decision with. The ones that I asked are, what would King Solomon do? Which he was considered, one of the richest and wisest men, which is why it's someone that I revert back to. And the other person that I asked myself was, what would they do in this situation, is Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. When I ask myself that question, and it depends on the scenario, which person I'm going to draw on to answer the question, depending on what suits best, what best suits the objective, et cetera. But I think if you don't know someone, then you can make it the value or the version of yourself with that value, or you can just use an external person that embodies a lot of the character traits that you hope to have, and that can be equally as effective. So it just depends on who you are, but I think any of those are good strategies that you can employ to maximally use this kind of tactic for self-improvement and self-change. What we repeatedly choose to ask ourselves, which creates our identity, which then creates the tasks that we do and the activities we spend our time on, reinforces the story that we tell ourselves about who we are, right? Or what type of person we are. What I shared with this individual is I said, what do you want to become? And if it's like a billionaire, it's like, cool, then what would a billionaire do? And always asking ourselves that question. And the reason that this was important when I was talking to this individual, I'll read you the text that I had said to him, because they got shared all over Instagram when I tweeted them or whatever, is that after he left, I said, here's a thought for you. So I was just like thinking about the conversation we had, and he had felt kind of shitty. And what's interesting about this is, like, as you level up in your life, and this is just an observation that I've had, is that, like, you will simply change who you compare yourself to. And I think Jordan Peterson talks about this in some talk he had, but I find it very true, which is you just change who you compare yourself to. And so you always find a way to make yourself feel terrible. And even if you're the best in the world at stuff, you'll just look at people who are better at other things than you and compare yourself to